Emma's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She wiped her hands on a towel and picked it up, expecting a message from a friend. Instead, it was from her mother-in-law, Margaret. "Would you and Daniel like to drink some wine with dinner tonight?" The words were simple, harmless on the surface. But Emma froze, staring at the message as unease washed over her. Margaret never did anything without reason. Every gesture, every comment, was carefully chosen, laced with hidden meaning. Emma had lived under her sharp eyes long enough to know better than to take this lightly. "Wine," she muttered, handing the phone to her husband. "What do you think she's really asking?" Daniel glanced at the screen, his expression unreadable. "Emma, it's just dinner. Don't twist it into something it's not." But Emma wasn't convinced. Margaret had crossed boundaries before, walking into their bedroom uninvited. Accidentally reading private notes Emma left for herself, making sly remarks about her parenting. A woman like that never offered wine out of kindness. Emma's suspicion grew darker. What if she's trying to test me? What if she's checking if I'm pregnant? The thought made her chest tighten. She hadn't even told Daniel she'd missed her period. It was too soon, too fragile, and the possibility felt too personal to share. If Margaret had already guessed how. That night, as they drove to Margaret's house, the city lights flickered past, but Emma barely noticed. Her mind replayed the text like an echo. Daniel talked about the business matters he and his father would discuss. But Emma wasn't listening. Something told her tonight wouldn't be an ordinary family dinner. And if Margaret was testing her, Emma wasn't sure she was ready for the results. Margaret's dining room glowed with warm candlelight, the table already set when Emma and Daniel arrived. Crystal glasses sparkled in the glow, and the unmistakable scent of Margaret's rosemary chicken filled the air. "Ah, there you are," Margaret said with a smile too wide, her voice dripping with a sweetness Emma had learned to distrust. She pulled out a bottle of deep red wine, her eyes glinting as they met Emma's. "I thought we could celebrate tonight." "Celebrate what?" Emma asked carefully, taking her seat. "Oh, life," Margaret replied, almost too quickly. She filled Emma's glass to the brim before Emma could protest. The liquid shimmered under the light, dark and heavy. Daniel reached for his own glass without hesitation. But Emma hesitated. She placed her fingers on the stem, her heart pounding. If she was pregnant, she shouldn't drink. But refusing might draw suspicion, and Margaret never missed a detail. "You don't like wine, Emma?" Margaret asked smoothly. Tilting her head, the room seemed to quiet with the question. Emma forced a smile. "I'm just not very thirsty." Margaret's eyes narrowed for only a second. But Emma caught it. That fleeting expression, sharp and calculating, confirmed her fear. Margaret was watching her, testing her. Dinner continued with small talk, Daniel's work, Margaret's garden, but the conversation felt staged. Every time Emma lifted her fork, she felt Margaret's gaze pressing against her, waiting for a slip, a sign, a confession. At one point, Margaret leaned closer across the table, her voice low enough that Daniel wouldn't catch it. "You're glowing tonight, Emma." Different, almost expectant. The words froze her mid-bite. Emma forced herself to swallow, her throat dry. This wasn't dinner. It was an interrogation disguised as hospitality. The room felt smaller as dinner progressed, the warm glow from the candles doing nothing to ease Emma's growing discomfort. Margaret's eyes never left her face, glimmering with an intensity that made Emma's stomach twist. Every laugh Emma tried to force sounded hollow, every sip of wine heavier than the last. Daniel chatted casually with his father, Richard, about the business, oblivious to the tension radiating across the table. Emma glanced at him, her heart tightening. How could he not see it? How could he let his mother treat her like this? Margaret reached across the table, her hand brushing Emma's, a touch meant to be comforting but loaded with a different weight. "You know," she said, her voice soft and almost conspiratorial, "I was wondering if you might be pregnant. I thought maybe this wine would tell me something." Emma froze, the words hit her like a punch. Her fork clattered against her plate. She felt heat rush to her cheeks, embarrassment mingling with anger. "A test? She actually tested me." Daniel looked at her confused. "Wait, what?" Margaret leaned back, smiling faintly, the satisfaction in her eyes unmistakable. "I just wanted to see, you drank the wine." So she let the sentence trail off, as if her point had been made. Emma's hands trembled as she set her glass down carefully. Refusing another sip, her mind raced. The violation was complete, not just a simple dinner, not a harmless joke. This was a deliberate, invasive manipulation, wrapped in a polite smile. She felt a surge of disgust, but also resolve. Margaret had crossed a line, and this test, this petty intrusion would not define her. Not now, not ever. But as the night dragged on, Emma realized the battle had just begun. Margaret's control over their lives, subtle as it had been, had just grown sharper, more dangerous, and for the first time, Emma understood that protecting herself and her family would take more than patience. It would take courage. The drive home was silent. Emma stared out the window at the passing streetlights, each one casting fleeting shadows across her face. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Knuckles white, Daniel chatted about work, about the dinner with his parents, about mundane details, but Emma couldn't hear him. The words didn't reach her. Her mind replayed Margaret's words again and again. I was wondering if you might be pregnant. I thought maybe this wine would tell me something. The casual, almost proud tone in her mother-in-law's voice burned like acid. How could anyone invade such an intimate part of someone's life with such confidence? Emma finally spoke, her voice trembling. Daniel, did you hear what she said? He turned toward her puzzled. Hear what? That was a test, Emma said, frustration cracking through her words. A test to see if I'm pregnant. She actually tested me with wine. Daniel sighed and leaned back, rubbing his face. Emma, she didn't mean harm. That's just how she is. You're taking this too seriously. Emma's chest tightened. Too seriously. Too seriously. She had been living with Margaret's manipulations for years, silently absorbing criticism, invasions and control, and now, this audacious intrusion into her privacy was being dismissed as if it were nothing. I'm not taking it too seriously. Emma snapped, voice rising. This isn't normal. This isn't okay. She has no right to test me, to manipulate us, to treat my body like some game. Daniel looked away, uncomfortable. He didn't argue, but he didn't defend her either. That silence cut deeper than Margaret's words ever could. For the first time, Emma realized the truth. She could not rely on Daniel to protect her from his mother. She would have to take control herself. Tonight, she felt both betrayed and awakened. The battle wasn't over, it had just begun. Emma couldn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Margaret's calculating smile and heard the words she would never forget. I thought maybe this wine would tell me something. Her stomach churned, a mixture of anger, disgust, and disbelief. It wasn't just the wine. It was the culmination of years of manipulation. Margaret had always inserted herself into Emma's life under the guise of concern, rearranging furniture without asking, criticizing how she raised Leo, inspecting closets and drawers, by accident. Each act had chipped away at Emma's sense of control, subtly undermining her authority in her own home. Emma paced the living room, hands pressed to her temples. She thought about the recent blowout between them, the argument that had ended in silence rather than resolution. Margaret had made her feelings irrelevant before, but now the stakes had changed. This wasn't just meddling, it was a deliberate invasion, a psychological test designed to assert dominance over Emma's body, her choices, and her life. Daniel remained largely unaware of the gravity of the situation. He had shrugged, dismissed it, excused his mother's behavior. That realization stung more than Margaret's audacity. If he couldn't see the violation, if he couldn't stand with her, then Emma knew she had to become her own protector. She thought about boundaries, about the invisible lines Margaret had repeatedly crossed. Emma clenched her fists. No more. If Margaret wanted a game, she would learn that Emma didn't play by her rules. She would reclaim the control she had lost, protect her family, and set limits that could not be ignored. The wine test had been a spark, igniting a fire Emma didn't know she still had. Margaret may have believed she held the power, but Emma now realized power was never given, it was taken, and she was ready to take it back. A few days later, another dinner at Margaret and Richard's house loomed over Emma like a storm cloud. The memory of the wine test was still fresh, burning in her mind with every thought of Margaret's smirk. Emma debated whether to attend at all, but Daniel insisted it was important for the family business discussion. When they arrived, the familiar facade of warmth was in full display. Margaret's smile was wide, almost predatory, and Richard greeted them with an oblivious cheer. Emma forced herself to return the smile, keeping her tone neutral. She had learned long ago that showing anger or discomfort was exactly what Margaret wanted. The wine was poured before Emma could protest. Margaret's eyes lingered on her with unnerving intensity. Emma gritted her teeth, lifting her glass with deliberate care. Every sip was a silent act of defiance. As the conversation shifted to business, Margaret leaned slightly toward Emma, her voice low, meant only for her ears. You're looking radiant tonight. I wonder if there's a reason for that. The words were innocent to anyone else, but to Emma, they were a dagger. Daniel, oblivious, laughed at something Richard said. While Emma's heart pounded, she wanted to snap, to confront Margaret then and there. But the words stuck in her throat. Every instinct screamed that she had to protect herself and Leo, but the social pressure of the table pinned her down. When dinner ended, Emma felt a mixture of relief and frustration. Margaret had succeeded in her silent game, and Daniel had remained passive, unwilling or unable to defend her. As they drove home, Emma made a vow to herself. She would no longer allow Margaret to manipulate or intimidate her. She would reclaim her boundaries, regardless of whether Daniel supported her or not. The next move would be hers, and she was ready. That night, Emma sat alone in the living room, the soft hum of the ceiling fan, the only sound breaking the silence. Her mind raced, replaying the dinner scene again and again. Margaret's gaze, sharp and calculating, haunted her, the way she had manipulated the wine, the casual way she had pried into Emma's personal life. It wasn't just annoying, it was controlling. She thought about all the times Margaret had crossed boundaries, moving furniture without permission, criticizing how she raised Leo, reading notes Emma had left in private. Each action seemed small on its own, but together they formed a cage, one Emma had felt trapped in for years. And Daniel, distracted by work and loyalty to his mother, seemed oblivious to the emotional weight Emma carried. Emma clenched her fists, the frustration bubbling up. It wasn't just about this one dinner. It was every invasion, every comment, every manipulation piled together into a suffocating wall. She had tried to let things slide in the past, hoping Daniel would step in or that Margaret would respect their boundaries, but nothing had changed. She realized that if she continued to remain passive, the cage would only tighten. Margaret had tested her once, and it had hurt, but Emma refused to let it happen again. She needed to set rules, assert control, and protect her family. For the first time, Emma made a decision. She would no longer wait for Daniel to act. She would confront the invasions directly, firmly and without apology. She would defend her life, her choices, and her child. The wine test had been a wake-up call. Margaret may have believed she had the upper hand, but Emma now understood the truth. The power to reclaim her life was in her hands, and she was ready to fight for it. The following morning, Emma woke with a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in years. The wine test wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a symbol of all the times Margaret had overstepped, all the invasions, all the disrespect. This time, she decided, she would respond differently. She sat at the kitchen table with a notebook, jotting down every boundary Margaret had crossed, every moment where her privacy had been violated. Emma wanted to be precise, to have facts and examples ready. This wasn't about drama, it was about protecting herself, her husband, and Leo. Daniel came into the kitchen, grabbing coffee. Still thinking about last night, he asked casually. Emma didn't look up. Yes, I am. And I've realized something. We can't let your mother dictate our lives, our choices, or even our family planning. Not anymore. Daniel sighed. Emma, it's not that serious. She didn't mean harm. Emma's eyes finally met his. It is serious. And ignoring it hasn't helped. You've let this continue for years. And I can't stay silent anymore. She planned every word she would say to Margaret next time. Every calm, firm sentence that would leave no room for manipulation. She rehearsed responses to Daniel's potential defensiveness. She imagined the looks Margaret might give, the subtle smiles, the feigned innocence. But Emma felt ready. By the end of the morning, Emma felt a strange combination of fear and empowerment. She knew confronting Margaret wouldn't be easy. It would test her patience, her composure, and her strength. But for the first time in years, Emma felt in control. The wine test had sparked something inside her, a determination that couldn't be ignored. Tonight, she would reclaim her boundaries, and Margaret would know she could no longer play games with their family. That evening, Emma took a deep breath as she walked into Margaret and Richard's house. The familiar scent of rosemary chicken and polished wood greeted her. But this time, it didn't intimidate her. She had rehearsed her words, mapped out her boundaries, and mentally prepared herself for resistance. Margaret greeted them with her usual wide smile. But Emma noticed something different. There was a faint flicker of uncertainty in her mother-in-law's eyes. Emma held Daniel's hand briefly, then released it, standing tall as she faced Margaret. I need to talk to you, Emma said, her voice steady, about boundaries, about respect, and about our family. I cannot, and will not, allow my privacy to be invaded again. The wine last week was not acceptable, and I will not tolerate tests or manipulations regarding my body or life choices. Margaret's smile faltered, her hands tightening slightly on the wine glass she had been holding. Emma, I. No, Margaret, Emma interrupted, maintaining eye contact. This is serious. Your interference has been ongoing. Moving furniture, criticizing how we raise Leo, going through our personal things. It stops now. Daniel, I need you to understand that I cannot fight this alone anymore. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Margaret. Then at Emma, he finally nodded, a flicker of realization crossing his face. You're right, Em, I should have seen it sooner. Margaret opened her mouth to respond, but Emma held up her hand. No excuses. We are a family, and boundaries are non-negotiable. You will respect them, or you will not be involved in our personal decisions. Silence filled the room, heavy and tense. For the first time, Emma felt the power in her voice, the strength in her stance. The cage of manipulation had begun to crack, and she knew that, while Margaret might never fully approve, Emma had reclaimed control over her life and family. The next morning, Emma woke with a sense of calm she hadn't felt in years. The confrontation with Margaret had been tense, but it had also been liberating. For the first time, she felt that her voice mattered, that her boundaries could no longer be ignored or dismissed. Over breakfast, Daniel placed his hand over hers. I'm sorry I didn't see it before, he said quietly. I realize now how much she's been controlling, and how much it's affected you. We'll do this together. Emma smiled, relief mingling with pride. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Margaret might push back, test limits, or attempt manipulation again. But Emma was ready. She had drawn the line, and this time it would not be crossed. Later, she spent time with Leo, watching him build towers with his blocks. The simplicity of the moment reminded her of why she was fighting. It wasn't just for herself, it was for her family, her marriage, and the future of her child. Emma reflected on the lessons of the past weeks. Margaret's test with the wine had been shocking, invasive, and cruel, but it had also served as a wake-up call, forcing Emma to recognize the patterns of control that had gone unchecked for far too long. She had faced fear, frustration, and the reality of Daniel's inaction, and she had emerged stronger. By the afternoon, Emma felt a renewed sense of confidence. She knew she could maintain her family's boundaries, protect their privacy, and assert her voice without fear. Margaret's presence might still loom, but her power over Emma had been broken. For the first time in years, Emma felt in control, not just of the evening's events, not just of her marriage, but of her life. And that realization, more than anything, was worth every ounce of courage she had summoned. Weeks had passed since the confrontation, yet the memory of Margaret's audacious wine test lingered like a shadow in Emma's mind. But this time, it no longer frightened her. It reminded her of the strength she had found within herself. Daniel had begun to actively support her boundaries, subtly yet deliberately. He no longer shrugged off Margaret's comments or actions. He had become an ally, standing beside Emma in ways he hadn't before. Together, they began reinforcing their home as a sanctuary, a place where Leo could grow free from manipulation or fear. Margaret, on the other hand, had grown cautious. She smiled less broadly, measured her words, and seemed aware that Emma's patience had limits, though she still attempted occasional tests of control. Emma's calm, firm responses now acted as an invisible barrier, a shield forged from experience and courage. Emma often reflected on the lessons this ordeal had taught her. She realized that boundaries were not mere suggestions, they were lifelines. Respect had to be demanded, not hoped for, and courage was the only way to reclaim control when others sought to dominate your life. Sitting in her living room one evening, Emma watched Leo build towers of colorful blocks. She smiled, thinking how much had changed. Her family's foundation was now rooted in respect and mutual trust, not fear or passive compliance. The wine test had been shocking, invasive, and humiliating, but it had ignited something far greater, a recognition of her own strength. Emma knew there would be challenges ahead, but she also knew that she could face them without compromise. She had reclaimed her life, her voice, and her family, and in that quiet, determined victory, Emma finally felt free. Thank you for watching till the end. Please don't forget to like, share with your family and friends, and subscribe to this channel for more stories.